I could be very high.
It's a new day, but not on the Enterprise. We're in what looks distinctly like a monastery based on robes and candles, one inhabited by Vulcans. Some Andorian lads seem eager to get in and force open the door, with their weapons implying they probably aren't here for the chanting. To the Enterprise we go, where Tucker's moaning about using Vulcan maps. He says it's not really exploring, but Archer's decided they have their uses. For one, they tell us about the planet that's only slightly off our current course. T'Pol says it's the site of an ancient Vulcan retreat, a place where they go to meditate and learn to control emotion. She also tries to make it clear a visit would not be welcome, which Archer chooses to ignore. Perhaps part of her disapproval is that we're not able to call ahead and warn them. Peaceful meditation and technology not really mixing well. Down we pop to find evidence of the meditation not being particularly peaceful based on the damage to the doors, though T'Pol suggests it might be due to the age of the place. We're greeted by a chap who says everybody's meditating and can't be disturbed, but T'Pol talks him into a blessing of sorts. T'Pol started to think things are a little off herself now, based on a few facts that aren't quite right. The chap returns with a relic, the Stone of Jakar, and we give it a bit of a stroke. Rather than leave afterwards, Archer starts monologuing while walking around. It's a pretense for exploring, of course, and he notes the reflection of an Andorian lad from the start of the episode. Tucker picks up on there being something wrong and joins Archer. Then the two of them make a play for the hidden guy. They grab him, but only long enough for his three mates to appear with guns, and we're all taken prisoner. The leader of the group is the latest incarnation of Jeffrey Combs as a guy called Shran, except not to us he isn't, as he's been adopted by a patron of the channel and will be known as General Thylek the Blue by order of Admiral M. Rowland. General Thylek the Blue doesn't think much of our arrival, largely because he assumes we're part of whatever's going on here. It would appear he thinks there's more to this place than a spiritual sanctuary, and he doesn't believe we just happen to call in while passing, not when we're so friendly with Vulcans that we're working with one. The Andorians leave so we can get down to the business of a lore dump. After being told they're Andorian, this being our first experience of them, we receive some background. Andorians are a galactic neighbour of Vulcans, and not a very friendly one, partly because they think Vulcans are preparing for an invasion despite a treaty between them. Thylek the Blue and his mates believe this place is a super-secret long-range listening post to spy on the Andorian homeworld. They've searched the place before, in fact, and usually bugger off after a day or so of finding nothing. That's until we arrived and attacked them, of course. Now they're even more suspicious, and that could end very badly indeed. Reed's starting to worry. He spotted an unknown ship near the retreat, and he doesn't like that we've not heard from the away team either. That's because Archer's busy getting the shit beaten out of him by General Thylek the Blue. He wants to know why we've got a Vulcan science officer, and being told we had her foisted on us just makes him think we're working for them. A call from the Enterprise interrupts them and is answered by Thylek the Blue himself. He tells Reed that the away team are now prisoners of the Andorian Imperial Guard and the Enterprise is being observed. Any aggressive act will result in executions. Smashing every phone suggests he doesn't really want to talk anymore, but Reed's not content to leave it at that. He orders a shuttle to be prepared and for Hoshi to see what we can find out about these Andorian lads from the Vulcan database we have. Down on the planet, Archer's being returned after his interrogation. He thinks the Andorians are going to start shooting if they don't find what they want this time, which is a problem when the chap in charge says there's nothing to find. Another problem is that Archer suspects Reed will turn up with guns blazing if our imprisonment goes on too much longer. This news has the Vulcan in charge remember that they do have a transmitter tucked away in the catacombs actually, but it's not been used for years. Off Tucker pops with a younger Vulcan into some hidden passageways, and after a bit of a look around, we arrive at the phone and start fiddling. Everybody's back together again later when the Andorians check on us. Tucker's not finished yet, so after they've gone, he starts fiddling with a part. While he works, T'Pol and Archer are talking. Archer thinks we could teleport a security team down and, if they don't appear with their guns inside them or some shit, overwhelm the Andorians. T'Pol's not sold on the idea. She thinks it's needlessly dangerous, not only for the people, but the site and all the artifacts as well. That's only part of it, though, and Archer concludes it's also a desire to avoid violence, not because of the act itself, but because they want to see themselves as more civilized than barbarian races like Andorians and humans. There's no time to argue the Vulcan ego, though, so Archer instead wants to know she'll support whatever play he makes. She responds that she's never disobeyed an order, which I note is not the same thing as promising to keep following them. The Enterprise is receiving a call. Tucker's finally got the phone fixed in the tunnels and is updating Reed on developments. He's also telling Reed to hold off with any rescue attempt until he hears from us, as we're working on some ideas ourselves. To that end, we're examining a makeshift map of the catacombs. Archer asks about a room the Vulcans say is a reliquary, one that stores their most valuable artifacts, but it's not been disturbed in years and the boss doesn't want us anywhere near it. Tucker remembers seeing some stairs up to 3 holes in a wall, though, which look a lot like they match a carved face in the room where Archer was interrogated. There's only one way to be sure, so Archer tells the Andorians he wants to talk again. General Thylek the Blue is willing to listen, but quickly loses patience when it becomes clear Archer's just pissing their time away. He gets the chance to toss a carved figure through one of the holes, though, and Tucker finds it on the other side. Now we know the two are connected, we can start forming a plan. The Vulcan in charge isn't chuffed about the idea of violence, though he's smart enough to do nothing more than condemn it on principle. That way he'll either be proven right or set free, so it's a win-win. Part 1 of the plan involves Reed and some others teleporting down into the holding room. They're in the catacombs by the time the Andorians arrive to check the odd power spike they just detected. Thylek the Blue thinks shenanigans are afoot and leaves one lad to watch us. Back in the main chamber, the Andorians have noticed there are now 3 new human life signs, and they're close. Very close, in fact, as Reed is currently sticking some plasticine on the back of the sculpted face. This is particularly kaboomy plasticine, and we all pile in through the resulting hole. Pooping abounds, with 1 Andorian and 1 human out of the fight as a result. General Thylek the Blue heads into the tunnels through the kaboom sculpture, while Reed and another lad rescues everybody else. The Vulcan boss is upset at the noise, which is a bit of a dick response for having just been fucking rescued. The young Vulcan who showed Tucker around doesn't agree with him and joins our group in chasing the 2 remaining Andorians. By a curious coincidence, it looks like they've scarpered into the very secret and forbidden reliquary. The Vulcan says he'll take them on himself so we don't disturb what's in there, and Archer tells him to bollocks. We all pile in to find the room that nobody's been in for years has a lot of burning candles and torches in it, which is a bit odd. We have another firefight and destroy some priceless antiquities, during which a hanging tapestry takes a hit. It's Reed who notices there's a distinctly high-tech looking door behind it and alerts Archer. He gets it open, all while under fire, and tells everybody gathered to stop shooting and come take a look. The secret listening post inside is a significant piece of kit. Archer tells T'Pol to start taking photos with her scanner, which the young Vulcan lad takes issue with. He wants us all to disarm, so Archer just spins around and twats the bastard. T'Pol finishes up with the photos, and Archer orders her to give the scanner to General Thylek the Blue. She's not entirely sold on the idea, but does it anyway. When Archer makes his position clear that the Andorians have a right to know what's going on here, T'Pol makes a show of being the one to contact the Enterprise and grant Thylek the Blue safe passage. He has the courtesy to acknowledge we've done him a solid before he departs, so we'll leave Archer and company to contemplate what this all might mean for our relationship with the Vulcans as we get ready to take another step on the long road. Ooh, intrigue! Well, sort of. I doubt many people watching were surprised by the reveal after multiple references to their forbidden reliquary. It doesn't matter, though, as the twist wasn't really the point. We're here to learn about Andorians and how Vulcans deal with species that aren't quite as compliant as we humans have been for the last century. The core of the episode deals with Vulcan arrogance, the air of superiority and enlightenment. It also shows how that position of lofty moral judgment is largely undeserved, an affectation without the qualifications to back it up. The Vulcans speak of volatility in Andorians, then ignore their own treaties. The Vulcans make claims of paranoia in Andorians, then spy on perceived threats. The Vulcans deplore the violence of Andorians, then threaten it to cover their own misdeeds. Not that the Andorians are blameless here, of course. They show themselves to be aggressive towards the unknown for a start, and presenting one of them as a sex offender makes it pretty unambiguous that they're not saints. We can perhaps excuse the former due to those suspicions being well-founded, but the latter shows at least some of them like abusing the power they wield. We're back in those moral grey areas that I like so much again. Both sides in this are right and wrong, but only one of them is claiming complete innocence. Even that's too basic a summary, though, as it seems clear T'Pol was unaware of the installation and didn't fight it being revealed. Perhaps that's a simple application of logic, the understanding that she couldn't have prevented it by this point. Whatever the reason, she still complied. One story has created conflict not just between us and Vulcans, or Andorians and Vulcans, but potentially between Vulcans and Vulcans as well. It's not a perfect story, though. We've already mentioned the heavily telegraphed twist, and I take issue with the door to the listening post as well. It's all down to the people inside and how long they stay. If the crew are teleporting in and out, there's no need for a door at all, so let's dismiss that option. It's likely any shielding that prevents the place being scanned also prevents teleportation. How the facility manages to perform its own scans under those circumstances raises some questions, but let's ignore that for now. We'll also assume there aren't any other entrances for much the same reason, namely that you wouldn't stick a techno door in the monastery if you had an alternative. So let's say for the purpose of argument that they had literally no other choice. For reasons we don't know, placing the entrance to the listening post somewhere else just wasn't an option. That leaves us with the question of how regularly people inside are entering and exiting. If it's a common occurrence, then based on the appearance when we find it, the monks must have a dedicated dust and cobweb weaver to cover the passageway every time, which seems somewhat unlikely. If it's long enough for all that detritus to accumulate organically, why are they popping out to regularly replace those candles and torches? And that's without asking why they didn't just put something a bit more substantial in front of the very obvious door. For that matter, why have the door be very obvious at all in the first place? We know the Andorians have searched the monastery multiple times, so discovery was always an option. And suggesting the people who have secret passages don't know how to hide an entrance is demonstrably absurd. They literally have one in the episode. No, the only reason the techno door is big and obvious is because we need it to be big and obvious, a necessary plot device to advance the discovery. Does any of the stuff I've just said matter? Not particularly, no. I'm on record as saying a little suspension of disbelief is a price worth paying for a good story, and this gives us plenty to chew on. It upends any belief that the Vulcans are a thoroughly noble and honest species, at least during this point in their history. I've read that the writers took some shit from fans for this particular portrayal of Vulcans, which is yet another potential pitfall of a prequel series. Too similar and they call it boring, too different and it's against the spirit, or some bollocks. I personally have very little patience with that last argument, as it essentially boils down to saying a universe should be preserved in amber, despite the passage of hundreds of years. You only need to look at our own history over a century to see why this is utterly absurd. Besides, if a writer isn't allowed to take an idea in new directions, stagnation is inevitable. Enough about the story, let's end with some incidental details. First off is Dr. Phlox. We get a little speech from him when he discovers T'Pol is not enamored by being associated with humans. Now, this could just be him sticking one to the Vulcans, especially if denobulants have been around for long enough to know they're not all they pretend to be. But I think it's more likely he was being sincere and saw a chance to both defend humans and help T'Pol see our similarities. It's not the first time Phlox has acted like a counselor of sorts, as he did the same to Hoshi during her time of crisis. Perhaps it's all connected to his stated interest in observing behavior, or perhaps it's just his core desire to heal. Either way, Trek's tendency to make the outsiders the most likable characters is holding firm, or maybe they're simply the ones I'm drawn to. Let's end today with a line from the Vulcan boss in charge of their spiritual sanctuary, one he gives when faced with the possibility of us entering their reliquary. To do so would be blasphemy. The likely real reason for this is to avoid discovering the listening post, of course, but that could have been done without the use of a word that carries religious connotations. Blasphemy certainly isn't a term you'd expect to hear from people who value emotionless clarity above all else. Maybe it's a translation issue, the closest word in English coming with unintended implications, but there's a chance his choice is closer to the truth. We've spoken before about how some 24th century Vulcans hold logic in an almost religious reverence, an attitude that runs contrary to the principles of cold logic. Seeing that those two seemingly conflicting ideas were more closely bound in the past might go some way to explaining that contradiction. Maybe we're clutching at straws again, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time we've made something of nothing, but it does tie in nicely to our other point from today's story about the Vulcans we've seen not being quite what we expected yet. This series might focus on the story of how human society develops, but that doesn't mean we're the only ones doing so. End of episode.
Right then, if we're gonna pull off a mutiny, we'll need allies.
We're just jumping straight to the violent overthrow then, are we?
Well, I'm not saying that's definitely how it'll end up, but, either way it's best to be prepared. Who have we got so far then?
My pet on the lower decks will join in if I threaten him a little.
What about this doctor? If he's dorsing your lad up, he might be game.
Probably. He seemed to be taking a more than scientific interest in things.
Hey, that's a thought. What if we flooded the decks with the same jolly juice he's using on your pet?
I'm not sure. It works on my guy largely because I can use the effects to influence him.
Well, we could always do a test run and see how it works out.
I don't know if a ship full of hallucinating, uncontrolled humans is particularly wise.
Maybe not, but bugger it, let's do it anyway. Can't be any more violent than Janeway was. Oof.